Hey friends, my name is Holly Jackson, and I am the Associate Conference Minister for Justice and Witness Ministries for the Central Atlantic Conference. And I'm coming to you today to talk to you about how the church is working to be anti-racist in this time. Now, first, we know that our faith calls us to be anti-racist, that God has asked us to love our neighbors as ourselves. And that's all of our neighbors, not only the ones that look like us or that act like us or that grew up like us or that live next to us, but all of our neighbors, all of humanity, all across the world. And we know that Paul wrote in his letters to the church that we are all one in Christ Jesus, that there isn't any nationalities anymore. There's not any gender anymore. There's not anything that separates us one from another under the love of God. And so we are called as people of God to love all people and to advocate, especially for those that society marginalizes or oppresses or otherwise separates from the majority of people. And so we are called to do this anti-racism work as part of our work of following Jesus. The good news for United Church of Christ is we have always been doing this work. In 1957, when our denomination was writing its bylaws, we were also, as part of those bylaws, there was a commission of the first group to talk about racial justice and how that would impact the United Church of Christ as it was coming together as a denomination. So, from our inception as a denomination in 1957, that has been part of who we are. And so, that commitment to racial justice continued throughout all of our time as a denomination. So that now, today, after so many decades of working on this, of working on environmental justice through a racial justice lens, we worked on media justice through a racial justice lens. We've worked on ending white supremacy. In fact, in 2022, our conference sponsored a measure that went to General Synod and was a resolution at General Synod that talked about confronting and creating white supremacy free zones. And so we have always done this work as a church, and it is part of who we are as a church. So, what does it mean then to do this work of anti racism? I want to share a few slides with you to help you understand what we're looking at and what it means to be anti racist. Okay, so what does it mean? So we know first and foremost that race is a social construct, right? So we know that we all, were we to cut us, bleed red, that all our skeletons underneath are the same. There's nothing really that separates us, humanity, one from another, except that we might have different skin color or we might have different hair texture. And that has ended up being different culturally and different ways that people have grown up and things like that. But race is really a social construct that we have put into place as a society. And it's become a lived reality for all of us as well. And, if there wasn't a hierarchy of races, that might not be an entirely horrible thing. But we do know that racism is a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of how one looks that unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities and unfairly advantages other individuals and communities and saps the strength of whole society through the waste of human resources. Because racism doesn't just hurt Black people or people of color, racism hurts all of society because it's a waste of resources for us all. And when we're talking about systemic or institutional racism, we're talking about a representation of white bodied centeredness in our society. That the white experience, that the white body, that the white privilege and point of view is the normal, and everything else around it is not. And so we should all be striving towards that uh, white centeredness. That's what racism tells us. And so anti-racism begins to break that down, begins to help us understand what race really means and what advantages and discrimination and oppression has done to kind of destroy us as a society because of racism. And anti-racism challenges ideas, policies, and practices that maintain that racial hierarchy, that maintain that white supremacy. And so you can be multicultural and multi-ethnic and multiracial, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're anti-racist. Anti-racism isn't simply about saying, hey, we have a diversity of people. Anti-racism is a saying, hey, we recognize that within this diverse group of people, there's different hierarchies that keep us in our places. We're going to pull those down. We're going to challenge those ideas and policies and practices that keep us apart and maintain that racial hierarchy. So, change? Who wants change? Everybody says, yes, we want to end racism. We raise our hands or we want change in our society. Great. But who wants to change? Hold up. Everybody puts their hands down because it's a lot easier to say we want things to change. Um, and then not think about the fact that in order for things to change, we're going to have to change. And what we think is going to have to change, what we expect is going to have to change, and the ways in which we live together is going to have to change. So, if we want change, we have to be willing to change. So, what does that change even look like? Well, if we want to become an anti racist church, an anti racist part of society, we have to kind of move along this continuum. We have to move from the fear zone, which is where we're not really anti racist at all. That's where we a lot of times start out. We kind of we deny that racism is a problem. We avoid hard questions around racism. We really want to be comfortable, and we really like to prefer and stay talking to others who look and think like we do, right? And so we see this a lot now in our society. We have people who are trying to change textbooks so we don't talk about slavery because that makes us uncomfortable, and we're trying to forget that the Civil War was fought largely because of slavery. So we're trying to erase that history, right? So they that's where a lot of people start out. It's fear. It's this fear of change. It's this fear that maybe I might lose some of my power and privilege if we move away from this racist system. And so we ask people to move into the learning zone, seek out questions that make me uncomfortable, and understand our own privilege and help us to understand that racism is a present problem, educate ourselves around race and racism and what it's done in the past and how that's lived into today, and be vulnerable about our own biases and knowledge gaps instead of being defensive. Instead of saying, no, I'm not racist, say, am I? Or are there ideas and things that I'm used to that are racist or perpetuate racism? Right. And so we want to be vulnerable about that. We want to be curious about that. Question ourselves, question our institutions, question our society. And we want to listen to others who think differently than we do. And then we want to move more and more towards that growth zone, which means that we can sit with that discomfort that we might get, right? We're acknowledge that some of us might really benefit from racism in very different ways. And we might speak out when we see racism in action. We start to educate our peers. We don't let our mistakes deter us from getting better, right? We will all make mistakes. We will all sometimes say or do or think because that's the system we come from. So as we try to move out of that system, we might make a mistake, and that's okay. We give each other grace. We forgive ourselves, and when we know better, we do better. So that's how we go from being in the fear zone to moving towards growth zone and becoming anti-racist along that continuum. And we want to dismantle racism at not just our personal level. Yeah, okay, we want to change ourselves and think about how we are. That's great. But need to think about change as being bigger than just us as individuals. We change at the personal level, but then we look around at our institutions. And when we're talking about the church, we talk about our congregations. We talk about how are our congregations being sitting in that system of racism and white supremacy. What are the ways in which we're making some decisions that might reflect that instead of the anti-racism we want it to reflect, and not just our church, but at the community level, our community institutions, our schools, our groups that we do together, and our counties and cities and states. How are we doing at that community level? Where is the racism and how are we rooting that out? And then at the systemic and institutional level, we're also looking at in which ways is racism affecting our whole society, our country. And of course, we see this happening in real time right now in our country, how racism is affecting, especially around the issues of immigration, and how Black and Brown people, people of color, are being especially targeted when it comes to immigration action, and how that's starting to spill over. And you're seeing people of all races trying to push back against that. That's anti-racist behavior, right? To say, hey, we're all in the same boat together, and we're not going to let the system just take it out on this group of people. So that's how we are working towards dismantling racism at a larger level than just our personal way of doing it. And here in the Central Atlantic Conference, we have two particular programs that are helping with that. First, we have what we call an anti-racist church audit. So many of you know audit, when you're talking about money, means we're looking back at the books for making sure that everything was done the right way as it should have been, right? Well, when we do an anti-racism audit, we're looking back at our churches and all kinds of things. We're looking at our worship. We're looking at how we choose music. We're looking at our governance. How do we make decisions? We're looking at our communications. We're looking at what do we teach? What is the curriculum we're using? Who are we hiring for our pastors? We start to look at all these different systems in our church, and we're thinking about how might racism be affecting those different systems in the church. And we have a facilitator that comes and helps the church think about what that looks like. And then we create a report that gives recommendations. So if you want to work as an anti-racist church, here are some of the ways in which you might start dealing with the specific things that your congregation might be struggling with or might need to work with around anti-racism and its ways in which it's breaking down those prejudices and biases, right? So that's one way. The other way we call the journey. And the journey is more of that one slide I just showed you that was talking about personal and congregational and societal and community. And so it is talking about that journey, right? That movement from that fear zone to the growth zone, and moving into change. And so how are we doing that as personal, as individuals, but then also how are the institutions we're part of doing that as well? It's not quite the audit, but it is the ways in which we're moving through that journey to becoming anti-racist. And what does that mean? And this is really important for you all to know and to understand because this church is your church, right? And so if the church is working to be anti-racist, you need to be a part of that. You need to be a part of that in how you're working together with your church on anti-racism issues. You need to be a part of that as to how your transformation personally and as a church might also be going to your school, might be going to your relationships with friends and family, might be going to your wider community. And so these are important things for you to be working on, because it is a part of our faith. It is part of what we are called to do as Jesus's followers. And my hope is that the church that your children will attend will be fully anti-racist, that we will start to be able to move past all of these things because they're not the issues that they once were for us. And that starts with the work that you all can do right now with your church on these anti-racism endeavors. And so I just want to highlight that really what we need to do is move beyond talk to begin to change our beliefs and attitudes that permeate our thinking and actions, to tear down biases and prejudices that lead to discrimination and profiling and microaggressions, to tell the truth about race and racism and white supremacy, and how it's affecting us and our friends and our congregations and our families and the society around us, right? We want to work to heal people of African descent and of all communities of color that have suffered for generations that are still suffering today. And we want to pray for those situations and work to end those situations. We want to transform all structures that perpetuate inequity, inequality, and deny justice, right? This is the work we must do if we're to begin to live into God's vision of justice, peace, and the beloved community. We must examine the ways we contribute to racial injustice and maintain the systems and structures that cannot continue. And as the Central Atlantic Conference, it is our work and it is part of our commitment to end systemic racism and white supremacy in our local churches, and in our associations, and in our conference as a whole. And so, in those structures that may devalue and deny so many justice and their God given rights as a member of humanity, as God's beloved children. And so I thank you for continuing to look at this issue, for considering it as part of what your church and what you as youth are doing, to make this world a better place, to usher in the reign of God on earth as it is in heaven, as we pray every week. And so part of that is anti-racism work. There's something that was said this summer I saw at General Synod. It said, anti-racism is my spiritual practice. It is a spiritual practice to be anti-racist. So I invite you to be part of that and to make anti-racism a part of your spiritual journey as well. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a good rest of your retreat.